Every era produces a version of the strong woman that is designed, consciously or not, to serve the needs of that era rather than the woman herself. Sometimes she is strong because she is compliant. Sometimes she is strong because she is angry. Sometimes she is strong because she is angry. Sometimes she is strong because she consumes the right things, posts the right content, performs the right version of independence for the right audience. None of these is what the Stoics meant by strength. The Stoic understanding of a strong woman has nothing to do with what she performs for others, and everything to do with what she maintains within herself. The quality of her judgments, the stability of her character, the capacity to remain who she has decided to be, regardless of what circumstances, relationships, or other people's opinions attempt to make her instead. 2,000 years ago, women practiced this philosophy and were recorded by history not for how they looked or who they pleased, but for what they refused to surrender, even when surrender would have been far easier than resistance. Their names are largely unknown today. Their example is more relevant than it has ever been.
If you want to understand the complete foundation of Stoic philosophy for women, where it came from, who practiced it, and why it applies to your life right now, subscribe and hit the bell, because this is part 1 of a 3-part series on how to become a Stoic woman. Part 2 covers the principles. Part 3 covers the modern application. But first, the foundation that makes everything else possible.
Stoicism was founded by Zeno of Citium in Athens around 300 BC, and from its earliest period it held a position that was genuinely radical for the ancient world. Women possess exactly the same rational faculty as men, and therefore the same capacity for philosophical development and the same potential for genuine virtue. Musonius Rufus, the Roman Stoic philosopher who taught Epictetus in the 1st century AD, wrote explicitly in his lectures that it would be an absurdity and a disgrace to think that men should pursue virtue and women should not, or that men need self-control and justice and courage and women do not. This wasn't a progressive political position for Musonius. It was a logical conclusion from the central Stoic premise: virtue is available to any being with a rational mind. Women have rational minds, therefore virtue is available to women. The argument is airtight, and the Stoics made it at a time when almost no other philosophical or cultural tradition made anything close to it.
What did Stoic women actually look like in practice? Porcia, daughter of Cato the Younger and wife of Marcus Junius Brutus, is one of the most documented examples. Cato himself was perhaps the most extreme Stoic practitioner in Roman history, a man who eventually chose death over compromise with Julius Caesar's power in 46. His daughter inherited not just his name, but his philosophical framework. When Brutus was planning the assassination of Caesar in 44 BC, and refused to tell Porcia what was happening in order to protect her from the knowledge, she responded not with emotional pressure or manipulation, but with a demonstration of Stoic character so deliberate it remains remarkable 2,000 years later. She wounded herself in the thigh with a blade to prove to Brutus that she was capable of bearing pain and keeping secrets, that she had the endurance of character he was looking for in a confidante. This was not self-harm in the modern sense. It was a philosophical demonstration. She was arguing through her body that she possessed the same capacity for discipline and pain that the Stoics valued above every other quality. Brutus told her everything. She kept the secret through the assassination and its violent aftermath until Brutus's death at Philippi in 42 BC, after which she reportedly died by her own hand rather than survive him. Whatever you make of the choices she made, the character she demonstrated was unmistakably Stoic, self-governed, disciplined, committed to principles over comfort, and ultimately committed to a specific standard of her own life over the mere continuation of it.
Marcia, the daughter of the historian Cremutius Cordus and a close friend of Seneca's, is another documented example. When her son died, a loss that ancient sources describe as devastating, Seneca wrote his Consolation to Marcia specifically because she was, in his words, capable of receiving philosophical treatment of her grief rather than requiring the softer, more conventional consolation typically offered to women of her era. He addressed her as an intellectual equal, presented her with the full Stoic analysis of loss and impermanence and the relationship between attachment and suffering, and trusted her to apply it. This is the Stoic vision of a woman in grief, not protected from the philosophical reality of loss, not handled with softened language, but presented with the same rigorous framework that would be presented to any adult human being capable of rational thought. Marcia apparently received it as intended. Historical accounts suggest she did not merely survive her grief, but genuinely processed it in the Stoic sense, not suppressing it, not performing recovery, but actually working through it with the tools that Stoic philosophy provides. What these women had in common is more important than the specific details of their stories. They were self-governed. Their conduct was determined by internal standards that they maintained regardless of whether maintaining them was comfortable, socially approved, or emotionally easy. They possessed what Epictetus called in the Discourses the most important thing a human being can have: a will that functions as it should, one that doesn't desire what it shouldn't desire, doesn't avoid what it shouldn't avoid, and doesn't allow external circumstances to determine its fundamental orientation. This is the Stoic definition of a strong woman, not the performance of strength, not strength in service of someone else's agenda, the actual internal structure of a self that has been built deliberately and maintains its shape under pressure.
Now let's talk about why this matters, specifically for women in the current moment. The modern world presents women with an extraordinary range of external pressures about who to be, how to feel, what to want, what to prioritize, and how to present all of these to the people around them. Some of these pressures come from traditional expectations. Some come from their apparent opposites, movements and cultures that present themselves as liberating while actually substituting one set of external requirements for another. The Stoic observation about all of these pressures is the same regardless of their source. They are external. And external pressures, however they are dressed, whether in the language of tradition or in the language of liberation, have no authority over your will unless you give it to them. The Stoic woman is not a woman who has found the right external authority to follow. She is a woman who has recognized that no external authority determines the quality of her character, and has taken full responsibility for building that character herself.
This is more difficult than it sounds, and the Stoics never pretended otherwise. Epictetus was explicit that the practice of self-governance is not natural. It goes against every social pressure that tells you to derive your sense of self from external approval, external achievement, external relationship status, external appearance. These pressures exist for men too. But for women in the current moment, they come from more directions simultaneously, with more intensity, and with more apparent conflict between them. Traditional culture says you should be one thing. Progressive culture says you should be its opposite. Social media presents both versions alongside 10 other versions, and measures your worth in real time against all of them. The Stoic response to all of this is not to choose the right external standard. It is to build an internal one that is independent of all of them, specific enough to actually guide your behavior, strong enough to resist the constant pressure to abandon it, and genuinely yours rather than borrowed from any external source. The foundation of the Stoic woman begins with the same principle it begins with for everyone: the clear separation of what is within your control and what is not. What is within your control: your judgments, your character, your responses, your standards, your effort, your will. What is not within your control: other people's opinions of you, your physical appearance beyond what health practices can genuinely influence, the outcomes of your work, the choices of the people you love, the circumstances you were born into, the cultural moment you inhabit. Most of the suffering that the modern world produces in women, the anxiety, the comparison, the endless sense of inadequacy, is produced by directing enormous psychological energy toward things that are not within their control. The cultural beauty standard is not within your control. Whether your partner chooses to stay is not within your control. Whether your work is recognized is not within your control. Whether you are liked, approved of, chosen, desired, validated, none of this is within your control. The energy spent there is not just wasted. It is actively stolen from the only place it could produce anything real: the deliberate construction of your own character, which is entirely within your control, and which produces results that no external validation can either give you or take away. This is the foundation, not a feeling. Not a lifestyle, not a set of aesthetic choices or a brand of self-presentation. A philosophical orientation toward your own life, one that places the source of your worth, your stability, and your sense of self entirely within you rather than in any external condition or any other person's response to you. The Stoics built this over centuries and tested it under the most extreme conditions human beings have ever faced. Porcia demonstrated it with a blade in her own thigh. Marcia demonstrated it through the death of her child. Countless unnamed Stoic women demonstrated it in smaller ways, in smaller moments that were never recorded, but were no less real and no less demanding. You don't have to face anything that extreme, but you will face pressure. Constant, varied, sophisticated pressure to derive your sense of self from things outside yourself. The entire first part of becoming a Stoic woman is recognizing that pressure for what it is, and deciding, before the next time it arrives, that you will not let it determine who you are.
In part 2, we're going to cover the specific principles, what the Stoic woman actually does, thinks, and practices to build and maintain this internal foundation, how she trains her judgment, how she handles criticism, how she approaches relationships without losing herself in them, how she faces failure without letting it define her, and how she builds the kind of character that the world tries constantly to buy but can only ever be constructed from within. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss it, because part 2 is where the foundation becomes practice, and practice is where everything actually changes. See the game, control the game,